And I am going to be recording this, just so you know, and we'll share it with you all later if you'd like. But we want to capture this moment, which is really unique. So let's get started. I'm going to go ahead and spotlight Jeannie. And I wanted to start with Jeannie, thinking back the last time we worshiped together, March 8th, when we had no idea that would be it. And I think that was a Sunday where we had the Sound of Music, people singing, and just kind of a normal Lent Sunday that suddenly was it. So I wanted Jeannie to ask you to start just by recapping how we got from March 8th to February 7th and the process of decisions that have been made along the way to get us where we are.
Okay, and Jesse, I think that was the week I tried to go on retreat, isn't it also?
Oh, yes, it was.
I decided to go on retreat that week, and I was at a monastery in Pennsylvania, and it became apparent after about 24 hours that was not going to work. And so I headed back to Cleveland, and Jesse and I huddled together at her house, thinking through how to proceed. So March 15th was the first Sunday that we recorded services. So I thought I would just talk through some of the decisions that we were making right up front. One, why did we use St. Martin's? We used St. Martin's mostly because of the sound. We actually tried to record in the nave, and the sound didn't work with the high ceiling. So that's why we moved into St. Martin's. Why did we decide to use morning prayer? So you might remember the first few months we used morning prayer. As you know, for Episcopalians, communion is so embedded in community, right? The whole idea is that we're coming together to share communion. And so it felt like the right decision up front was to do morning prayer, since we couldn't be together in person. Of course, what happened is none of us expected that this would be going on for as long as it did. And so as we moved forward, obviously we knew how much people were missing the words of the Eucharist, but also there was so much discussion going on in those early months among everybody about what's appropriate in these sorts of situations, and lots of discussion among the bishops and the presiding bishop about what was theologically correct. And the presiding bishop and a majority of bishops came to the conclusion that both morning prayer and Holy Eucharist were appropriate for this situation. And so it was in May that we decided to start recording Holy Eucharist so that we could engage in that experience again. And we found that beautiful prayer of spiritual communion that we could all say together as a way of participating, even though we couldn't actually receive it. How did we decide to pre-record our services, just doing live stream? We thought that we could create something that would be more worship filled if we recorded. Also, we weren't able to sing, and in person, even just one person isn't able to sing. So we knew if we recorded the services, we could drop in the music. And also, right, you might remember when we first recorded services, the clergy were all together in St. Martin's Chapel. We didn't have masks on, but we were distanced from each other. But then we got the bishop and the diocese spent more time talking about it, and there was a concern that we might be putting each other at risk if we're talking in the same space. And so that's how we got, and because we like the idea of being able to record without masks on, we decided to start recording parts of the service in different parts of the building. So that's why we spread out. So we moved to use Holy Eucharist in May, and we went back to our regular pattern of Holy Eucharist and with morning prayer on the second Sunday of the month. And of course, the other thing that changed dramatically over the past year is the music. And I could go on and on and on about how grateful I am to our choirs for, there's so much work that goes into creating these virtual choirs, but it has allowed us to just have beautiful music on Sunday mornings. And I hope you were all able to hear Advent lessons and carols and our Christmas services. We started planning the music for those services, I think in October, because there were so many recordings that had to be prepared. And of course, it was all beautiful. So I feel like our recordings have really evolved over the past year. We hope that they're really worship filled. And I can talk more later about sort of what's next, how we're continuing to evolve.
Thank you, Jeannie. I think another a point that it's been kind of an incredible amount of change and decision making. And then one huge thing that happened was our staffing switched around who was doing the recording. So Kim Fry started out as our longtime communications director, then moved to California, and Nathaniel Powell started. So that's also, I think you can really see that change reflected.
Yeah. And one more quick thing. I know I'm short on time, but one thing we did recognize that people do enjoy the experience of being together through Zoom. And so that's why we have started doing Compline on Wednesday evenings. That is a Zoom service. So you're together with other people while the recording is going on.
Yeah, thank you, Jeannie. So as you were wrapping up, you mentioned the music piece, which has been such a journey of technological learning to get where we are. And so turning to Steve, I'll spotlight your video now. I'm curious, Steve, you are such a thoughtful person in how you approach music making and liturgy, and wondering if you can zoom out for us, not to, no pun intended with Zoom, but to talk about what it has been like as a music maker, as a music professional in the church in the pandemic, and particularly if there have been silver linings that have come to the light or specific challenges around music.
Well, thank you. And it's so good to be with you all this morning. Greetings from a very sunny Oberlin, blue skies. I'm in my study where there's a beautiful stained glass window of Richard of Chichester wearing a burgundy chasuble. The sun has sparked it so. And the reason I mention that is that I suspect if you look out your windows at Cleveland, the blue sky isn't there at the moment, and you're probably getting snow and the like. And this is the perfect metaphor for we are together, but in different places. And that's surely been the theme that we've been dealing with so often. When we modulated to recorded services, music became an important part of that. And the first thing we faced essentially was there was something that had to be produced. Music needed to be provided. A product, if you would, a thing that you could put in the recording. And it was very interesting to me in that process to realize that, of course, if we need a hymn, if we need an anthem, if we need an organ piece, there are thousands of recordings. We could have anthems from a vast YouTube library, a CD library. You could have the world masters for every genre, and yet that wasn't the product we needed. What we needed was music that was still of ourselves. And so we provided ways in which the choir and the organists all could continue to be offering what it is they do. And that process actually is one that there was a steep learning curve, but once you get to the peak of that curve, we've sort of figured out the way to do this. And the routine of it has been going pretty smoothly. The quickest version that you should imagine for the choir is that a singer is at home looking at me on the screen, waving expressively devotionally, and they are hearing Carl play an accompaniment. They're doing all of this with headphones on, and then they have their microphone and they are recording a hymn, and then the magician, Brian Skoog, magically puts it all together. But I mentioned earlier that what we needed to do was provide music. And music only narrowly is this product. Music has such a different dimension, especially in liturgy. And I want to take just the quickest second, because I'm watching my watch. Jesse, please, I'm watching my watch. Years ago, I was absolutely stunned with a remark that Bishop Tutu gave. It was in a documentary, and the interviewer had posed the question to him, what do Anglicans believe about transubstantiation? And I thought, oh boy, here we go. There's never been a good answer to that. I wonder what he's going to come up with. And I was fully expecting a liturgical, Eucharistic, theological statement in narrow sacramental terms. I was ready for the treatise. And instead, he wonderfully said, transubstantiation is what happens when we gather together as brothers and sisters, and in the Eucharist, we are transformed into the body and blood of Jesus. And I thought, goodness, that's not where I expected this to go. And I mentioned this because that whole idea of transformation is really the other aspect of music that we are at great difficulty trying to hang on to. I don't think that in our technological routine, we've been able to capture it, though we valiantly hang on. And it may well be, as Dean McGowan said this morning, that being in the desert, we see what we've lost. We see with new clarity the absences. When you sing together, you breathe together, you adapt, you listen, you draw on the energy of someone else, and the total is so much more than the sum of individual parts. It is transformative. It is absolutely transformative. And the very notion of imagining that transformation really leads us to what harmony in all its dimensions might be. If any of you have ever gone to monasteries and heard monastic choirs who sing hours upon hours a day, it's really quite stunning, for instance, the aural blend that they achieve. And yet, most not trained singers at all. What's going on there? They have come together not really to sing, they have come in harmony together habitually. And it's manifest in the sound itself. So this is the challenge. Virtual choir is a product, and it's a good product, and we're proud of it and delighted that it is there. It is a product in which we can see ourselves. It is not a recording that we just threw in from YouTube. It's not, here's my CD shelf full of St. Thomas, Fifth Avenue. Here's a great anthem. We'll put it there at the offertory. It is us. Whether you see us visually or not, you know that we are the ones doing the singing. It is us. But it is not us in our accustomed mode of encouraging, nurtured, and being nurtured by this transformative thing. So I think in the desert, so to say, as Dean McGowan has offered that image this morning, in the desert, what we see and yearn for, I think, is the togetherness that allow us to savor that transforming thing.
Thank you so much, Steve. I don't know how to articulate fully what's happening in my mind, but I think you have captured in the subject of music a larger challenge that we have of like how to do this hanging on while also deepening our faith and being transformed and producing this product. So which it isn't, but in some ways, like our whole orientation to worship has changed. And I think you drew out some of those threads that that are so present for us. Thank you for highlighting some of that. So turning now from the aspect of the people who are on one side of the camera to the other, wanted to turn to Andy Wheaton, who Andy has, I don't know how many of you maybe saw this, but this summer, we were grappling with how much our sacred space has changed. I mean, this is one of maybe the most obvious parts of the pandemic shift in worship, is that we can't worship together in our church. And so we were wondering about sacred spaces over the summer, and we asked a few parishioners to record a series of videos called Sacred Spaces, Prayer Places. Pega did one from her car. Andy did one from his tent. It's a great series still on our YouTube channel. And I'm wondering, Andy, if we can turn to you to chat a little more about sacred space. And I'm wondering, as a window into your home, if you feel like worshiping at home has somehow made it more sacred over the past year. And I'm especially curious, and one of the reasons we wanted to ask you to be one of the people speaking today was that perspective of having young kids and what it's like. And your kids are young, but like very with it, of the age of, they know what's going on, they're participating in worship. And so curious what it's been like for your family to worship together in that sacred space of your home. And do you sit down all and watch worship together? What is it on in the background? What does that look like?
Great. Thanks, Jesse. Yeah, so definitely I've been more attuned and thinking quite a bit since this whole thing started about sacred spaces, both inside and outside my home. And it's added a dimension to my experience at my home. I think a lot of people, living and working, that's always been part of it. I'm used to these TCons and these Zooms. We've been doing that for years. But the idea about like worshiping inside your home, that is new. I mean, saying prayers is one thing, but listen, like what Stephen was talking about, hearing that music inside my own home, that's a little bit unique. That's filling up my home with a different set of sounds than we were used to. And so it's kind of added like a cool dimension to it. It makes me appreciate what I have going on. I want to say I've tried to be very intentional about trying to like make a space, like an actual physical space in my home, but I haven't been very successful about it. And it's like a lot of things, if I try it too hard, if I try to force it, it doesn't really come. And what I've kind of realized over this last year is learning how to like let those moments and those spaces kind of come to me. And so I'm just going to share a few examples. You mentioned about the tent. That was special to me. I had a really good experience actually after that video. I just went for like a solo backpacking trip because I needed to get out of Dodge. Just had a weekend. And I went hiking, and I was just hiking, and I found this really special campsite. This is in the Allegheny National Forest in Pennsylvania. There's like this babbling brook. It sounded like a sound machine. It was so pretty. And I thought like, this is the place. Like I'm stopping here. It was earlier than I thought, and just kind of said a little prayer, thank you, God, for making this sort of space and letting me have an opportunity to be here. It wasn't a very beautiful prayer, but it was a prayer. And it was earnest, and it was a prayer nonetheless. And just spending that time there. And I've also noticed other times, like in my home, that kind of come to me, like this has been a great opportunity to spend so much time with my family. I haven't been traveling for work. We're not going to soccer practice. We're not doing those things, right? We're spending a lot of time together, and just we'll be around the fire. Everybody's reading, even the kindergartners starting to read a little bit. And it's really quiet and special. And I think about how nice that is to have that time together, how ephemeral it is, how this is not going to be like this forever. My kids are going to grow up and be out. And so like that sort of sacred, like that kind of comes to me when I'm not expecting it. And that's sacred, even though it wasn't exactly worship. And I'll say like a little quiet prayer in my head about like, thank you, God, for this time to get to be together. I'll never maybe have a year where like all of us were together this much in the rest of my life. That's special. And then also like, so even this morning, Stephen was mentioning about the snow here in Shaker Heights, at least we had like the prettiest kind of snow, the big flakes. And I was watching the worship, and the very Reverend McGowan, that sermon was excellent. The snow's coming down. I'm looking outside. I'm like, if this isn't nice, what is, right? Like, this is just really nice, really special. Nothing special about the space. I was at my work desk. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't, there were no candles or scents or anything. It was just like having that moment of recognizing that. So I guess what I'm saying is I've learned how to let those come to me. I think they may have always been there, but now I'm just like, frankly, just better at noticing it because I kind of have to, because I need that. It's not as easy as when we go into the nave and it's gorgeous and it's so nice. I mean, that it comes to you a lot easier, but you have to like maybe reach out a little bit more for it, but it's there. And then I'll just briefly get to about my worship with my family. We don't usually sit down and watch it all together. It's kind of an individual basis. We do it on our own time. I do want to say though, I think for my kids, the dimensionality that they've gotten from Lauren is doing a great job at Godly Play, Workshop Adventures, the way they've been putting together like these plays and I just loved the Christmas pageant this year. Like those sort of like different, it's special. They've engaged in a unique dimension that's been actually kind of a nice change of pace for them. And I've noticed the attendance at like Godly Play is up because the kids aren't doing soccer. There's a lot of little faces on the screen. It's really cute. And for Kelsey and Hannah with the virtual choir, like Stephen brought up, there's a lot of work that goes in. That's been so awesome. And the kids, the way that they can actually make these harmonies on this virtual platform is really special. And they've really grown in their choir this year. So seeing them, I guess, have like different ways to engage that are unique, but special in and of themselves has been an excellent experience for our whole family. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Andy. That is beautiful and such a relatable and I think helpful nugget for all of us to take away of that balance of opening ourselves up to God's presence and to God smacking us over the head at times, but also not being too anxious about it coming or not coming, that it will come. So thank you. A reminder to folks who are listening, if you have reflections or questions coming up, please direct message me in the chat and we'll get to those. If you have questions about the choices we've made in worship or experiences like we've heard folks sharing, please put those in. So Liz, wanted to turn to you for another voice from the pew, so to speak. And like I said at the beginning of the forum today, really the reason that we're pausing and doing this reflection in the wilderness is that we realize that this time, like Andy was saying, it's not going to last forever. And there are those silver lining moments about when we see ourselves with our family and recognize how much time we're spending together and all the different ways you guys are experiencing silver linings. So we wanted to ask you, Liz, to model for us reflection on what it looks like to reflect on how you've changed as a worshiping person. So what have you noticed about yourself through COVID worship? What are you learning about how you are? What matters to you? What do you imagine will stick around after? If you can take away what your experience has been from a slightly different angle.
Thanks, Jesse. Wow. Leave it to Jesse and Jeannie and St. Paul's to get you to think hard and reflect on what's going on in your life. When she first asked me, I was like, are you kidding? I'm just trying to hang on, as you said. But I think it's actually an important activity to undertake, to sort of sit back and think a little bit about your relationship with St. Paul's, with your relationship with worship, with your relationship with each other. And so where I at first was like, yeah, really? You want me to do this? I found that it's been a very good couple of days sort of thinking about what this all means to me. And I would have to say that my relationship with worship, I think, is always evolving. As I looked back, I think that I've sort of in some ways come full circle. So I have to talk a little bit about how I came into worship and what it meant to me to be able to talk about what the pandemic worship has been like and then where we're moving forward. And I began my worship life really as a young adult with very small children. And it was very much a personal space for me. It was a time when I didn't have a lot of a lot of time to myself to spend an hour sort of quietly reflecting, listening to wonderful ideas, thinking through the sermon, hearing wonderful music. And that really was my worship experience for quite a while. We then came and moved to Cleveland, and I had young children, and worship evolved at that point because it became something that I wanted to model for my kids, that I wanted my kids involved in the church. And for the first time in my life, church became community to me. It always had the personal piece to it, but it was also community. It was community for my kids. It was seeing a group of people that meant a lot to me. It was spending time in a very sacred space once a week in my life, giving me time and pause, but also spending time with my kids. And so for a long period of time, that's what worship meant to me. Then when my kids went off to school, and Andy, you're right, it happens really fast. I had to sort of then rethink, what does church mean to me? And I will say for a while, I didn't go as often. I didn't feel the need. And that was sort of a strange time for me. But my husband and I have really, and we then finally sort of landed on the 7:45 service, which in a funny way was bringing me more full circle to where I started with church, because it's a quiet morning service. But it also had community because it has my friends and the people that I care about that are there as well. What did I miss about it? I love the sermons, but I miss the music there. But it was very much back to sort of my roots of what worship meant for me. Then the pandemic hit, where we were no longer coming just every Sunday at 7:45. And I had to then again think, what was my worship life going to be like? And I found that it was really hard to be intentional at the beginning about showing up. I mean, I was listening to Andy say that they listened to it at different times. I tried a lot of different things in the beginning. I often would combine listening to the service with walks. I felt that that was sort of a sacred space to be outdoors in nature, and it was something that I didn't get to do. But I really missed the connection with other people. So I had then, I don't know, sort of in the summer, I guess at some point, started listening to the service sort of regularly on Sunday, but not at the same time of day, because I intentionally try to do it on Sunday at some point, which makes sense to me. The things that I've come away from, or that I love about doing the service now, is one, I'm back able to listen to the music, which is absolutely fabulous. I think the things that are translatable for me are the sermon, because that is a time in the service when you sit quietly and you're listening and you're thinking. And I think on Zoom, that really seems to work for me. I can find a quiet time, I can sit and listen, and I can think about it. I think the Eucharist, I know we're back doing it, and I love morning prayer and I love Eucharist, but Eucharist to me has the most meaning when we're all together, we're saying the words together, we're at the altar. And so for me, the Eucharist is not, it doesn't work as well on Zoom. I do like Compline because you're saying it with people, but for me, that's been the biggest challenge. But I'm okay with that because I'm spending a lot more time sort of thinking about the sermon and the things like that. You asked me, Jesse, what would be my takeaways from the pandemic and pandemic worshiping? And I think there are a couple of things. One is, as I'm in this phase of heading into retirement and thinking about leaving and doing things like that, what I love about the way we do church now is that we can do it anywhere, anytime, which means if I'm away or I'm traveling, which I've done a lot in the past, I just didn't go to church. And now I can take church with me. So that to me is something that I think I will always keep. St. Paul's will be always part of my routine, no matter where I am. And I think for people that are sort of my age, that can be a really important and vital thing. And I look at that as a really positive thing about coming out of the pandemic. It also, because you can do it anywhere, anytime, it really brings church in some ways away from Sunday and into your life. You can engage with church a lot more than just Sunday. And I think that is really powerful. And then the other thing that I would say is, and I don't know if anybody else has had this experience, but when I'm sitting in church, and I would say over the years, and it's more Sundays than not, I will be sitting in the sermon. I will be sitting and thinking and listening to the words that are being spoken. And I will sit there and I will say, gosh, I wish my kids could hear this, or I wish my mom could hear this, or, oh my gosh, it's like they're talking to one of my friends who's having an issue. And I just really wish that they could hear the message that was given today. And I will say over the years, I've tried to translate that when I go home, to say, oh, I heard this in church and it was this really amazing message and I'm really pumped up about it, but I'm never quite as good as the people that give the sermons. And one of the things that I found that I'm doing is that I often send the sermon and or the service, if it has special meaning to me, to various people in my life. And I thought about it, and I hadn't really thought about it until Jesse and Jeannie asked me to think about it. But it is sort of my way of being an evangelist, of saying, wow, look at the experience that I'm getting at St. Paul's, and I'm thinking of you, and I think this is a message that you would like to hear. So for me, that's something that as we're going to continue to do streaming and we're going to do our online and we have it recorded, it's something that's really powerful to me and feels like something that I just naturally want to do. So that part of it is also part of what my takeaway is of the pandemic. I can't wait to get back in community with everybody. That's going to be really full circle. But I think that spending time thinking about my experience, looking for the positive in the wilderness, I think it has revealed to me the things that are important, which is my personal thought process that goes on during the sermon, but also the need to be in community for things like Eucharist. And then my willingness to share is something new. I think the only other thing that I might take with me from the pandemic is I may occasionally wear yoga pants to church because it's really nice to be comfortable. And that's a new thing in the pandemic. So thanks, Jesse.
Thank you, Liz. And thank you for capturing. We had a couple people chatting me saying that you really, we said this when you and I talked earlier in the week, that you really were able to capture that, the personal experience of worship and the community experience, and that we are made up of both of those things as worshiping people. And that personal piece of hearing the sermon, experiencing it, is so important, but there's something powerful that happens when we do it together. And so thank you for naming that. I just want to say that we had intended to wrap up at 10:45. We're going to go a few minutes late. If you have to leave though, please feel free to hop off. But the last question I want to ask, and I'm going to direct it specifically to Jeannie. We started by looking back, how we got to where we are today. And I know that a lot of us are really curious about what comes next, for as much as we can know. So Jeannie, if you could just speak to some of the things that will stay with us from COVID and what we might be looking for next.
Right. So we keep hearing this message of, missing being together. We all miss that so much. And so what can we do? And as I said, that's one reason we have Compline on Wednesday evenings, because we do it by Zoom. So you have a sense of being together. Another thing that sometimes with services, we premiere them. You might read in Thursday e-news, we're premiering the service. The reason we do it that way is because you could sit down at that time and watch it, and you have a sense of watching it together with other people. You can watch it another time, but that at least gives us an opportunity of thinking we're all in our home sitting down at the same time and watching it. Going forward, though, we're ready to start transitioning back. So excited that it looks like that's on the horizon. So we have been, we started several months ago looking at live streaming. We have partnered with a company on that. You can only imagine how busy they are getting many churches up and going live streaming. We've purchased all the equipment. We've started the cabling. There's a little more cabling that needs to be done. And we need to install and put the cameras up in various spots in the church. So we're hoping that we're going to be able to start live streaming in the next couple of months. So one of the things I didn't realize early on with live streaming is that you can actually drop in recorded music. So we still can't sing. It could be some time before we're allowed to sing, but we could do a live streaming service and drop in recorded music. So we'll all get to enjoy the music. If we live stream, the clergy at the altar will need to be masked, at least for the time being. So, you know, again, these are all the things we always weigh back and forth of what are our priorities. But I think we're all so ready to be back together. It seems like this is the time, even if we need to be masked, that we can start live streaming. The wonderful thing about live streaming is it will stay with us, right? So going into the future, there certainly will be a transition time when some people may not be vaccinated yet. Some people might not feel comfortable coming into the church. So the live stream will be available. And also just going ahead, there might be times when, you know, someone is ill and can't make it to church. And so this will be an opportunity for them to watch the service. I know how much it meant to my mother. She attended Christ Church in Charlotte. They live stream, and it just meant everything to her when she couldn't get to church that she was able to watch the service. So, I guess that's the next step that the staff is really focused on, is getting this up and starting to practice with it, and hopefully being able to move to that in the next couple of months.
Thank you, Jeannie. I actually want to stay with you for a second to ask you a question that came from Lamar, who's asking, and I'm going to modify it a little bit, but Lamar was asking something that you're grateful for that's come from the pandemic. And I realize that a lot of the questions I've asked you have been about, like, you know, decision-making and things like that. But I'm wondering for you personally, what's something that you are grateful for with COVID, especially as it relates to being a person who worships?
Oh, particularly,
You can make it broad too. Just anything.
Well, the more broader thing is, I've told you, I mean, I'm endlessly grateful for Zoom. I mean, you know, if this had happened to us 20 or 30 years ago, we wouldn't have had Zoom. And I think I shared with you, on my birthday, my sisters, without me knowing, arranged a Zoom call with friends of mine from across the country. That never would have happened before. I was so surprised. I know in the last year of my mom's life, every week, my sisters and I got on Zoom with her. And I hadn't seen her in person for a year before she died, but because of Zoom, we were able to stay connected. So I am just, it's not what any of us want. We all want to be together in person, but the fact that we have this technology and we're able to stay together in a way that we never would have been able to a couple of decades ago, I'm just so grateful.
Definitely. Thank you, Jeannie. And I think it's so important to model that for each other, the gratitude piece of looking for the good parts in the wilderness that are going to sustain us through it. A couple of people had made comments similar to what Liz said, and Jeannie touched on a little bit about how people who are more homebound for whatever reason are now able to be more part of our community because of how we're doing worship. And I think as we live stream, that will become only more true. So either if you're homebound for health reasons, or if you are a snowbird and go somewhere else for the season that looks like this, then you can stay connected, which I think is a real silver lining. Emma also brought up that, and I think this is a great insight that I have heard other people say, and I think is worth sharing with everyone, is that we have a unique insight into each other's homes that we never would have, even though you can you don't know what the rest of my office looks like, but you can see my pretty wall. But we are seeing, and I think it's particularly powerful, which is how he brought it out in the context of worship, when we see the Wheaton girls sitting on their couch, and when we the Shear boys at Christmas in front of their Christmas tree with their dog in the background, like these little intimate insights we would never have had we been separate in the nave. And Emma also commented on how the opportunity for homilies to be different and to see instruments differently, preaching with harp, Julie Micheletti playing flute, how we just get to have these different insights. One second, let me just look at the questions that are coming in, and then we'll wrap up. Oh, this is a great question. And Jeannie, I will wrap up. This will be our last question because I think it's very logistical and appropriate. But if you're wondering if we are considering outdoor worship again, regardless of sort of where, well, not regardless, but even if the pandemic is not as far along as we hope.
Yes, yeah, I mean, that really, I think as soon as we can, as soon as the weather is okay, you know, that we'll try to move outside. I mean, I think it's possible that could happen in May, which would be fabulous. So as you all know, we've got a committee that I'm working with, and a task force for regathering. We're in the process of really fleshing out the guidelines for how we regather. We recently saw a video that was done at another church that they put together on exactly, you know, sort of what will happen when we're together and what you need to do, you know, what doors you come in and how you enter and exit the nave, and, you know, washing hands, and what will happen when you enter the church. Someone will take your temperature, all of those things. It's a fabulous video. We're thinking about putting something like that together. So we're flushing out how we can be together in person safely. And it would seem logical that, you know, that if the weather turns nice, that could actually be the first step. You know, as you all probably are watching very carefully, the case numbers are trending downward in Ohio, which is wonderful. They're still way too high, but they are trending downward. I know there's some fear among the medical community that these new variants might cause another surge. So, you know, we don't know for sure, but I feel pretty comfortable by this summer we'll be able to be outdoors together.
Thank you. All right. Well, thank you all for being here. I hope that that this has prompted some reflection for you about what you've learned about yourself, what you were grateful for around worshiping in the pandemic, and that I hope you'll share that with the clergy as you think and process. I know there's some kind of large questions, but grateful especially to our panel for modeling this kind of reflecting publicly. So thank you, Jeannie, for all the decisions and leadership you've provided us and for today. And thank you, Steve, for guiding us and bringing us to harmony still. And Liz and Andy, thank you for being there on the other side of the camera and gathering with us. So thank you all for being, we'll keep the room open if people wanna just catch up, but otherwise I'm gonna close us with a prayer, which is from the Book of Common Prayer. And it's a prayer after worship, knowing that some of you probably haven't watched worship yet, but it's a great prayer. And it's, I think, a prayer that's appropriate after what we have done just now as a community. Grant, we beseech you, Almighty God, that the words which we have heard this day with our outward ears may through your grace be so grafted inwardly in our hearts that they may bring forth in us the fruit of good living to the honor and praise of your name through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful week.
Thank you all.